We might begin. Victoria's she got lost on her way here, so she just rang me up before. So we'll welcome her when she arrives. But I'll introduce these three who are with us. We've got Matthew Jack, who is the minister of Knox Church, just around the corner from here. So it's great to have you, Matthew. And then next to Matthew, we've got Stephanie Robson. Stephanie Robson works for the Anglican Centre as the Dyson Educator. So these two are kind of our pastor theologian types, practitioner and thinkers. They're going to be bringing some of their thoughts to this very important topic of hospitality today. And then we've got Aklilu Habteghiorghis. He works with Red Cross and is part of the Pathways to Settlement team. Is just about to welcome some more refugees into Christchurch, which is really exciting. So it's great to have Aklilu. You were a former refugee as well. You've been a refugee in other countries. You're a migrant to New Zealand. Yeah. And then Victoria, who will be joining us in a minute. She has come from Nigeria, and she has, since being a migrant to Christchurch, decided she wants to bring cultures together, and so she's begun something called Merge Christchurch. They have events, cross-cultural events, bringing together food and entertainment, music and things from different cultures and bringing those together. So she may talk a bit about that as well. So it's great to have you four with us today. We started our series last week. I should introduce myself. My name's Andrew Meek. I'm the assistant minister of Oxford Terrace Baptist, which is the church in which this building is being hosted tonight. So we started last week with our series. We were talking with George Wheeland, who was down from Terrace Baptist College, and he did a really great job of introducing this idea of hospitality and the way in which it can be something in which we participate in the mission of God, particularly thinking about it as hosts and as guests, and not just being the host, but also in the way we can be guests as well in participation with what God is doing. So it's great to kind of follow that on today and think about this city that we live in, Christchurch. We have seen an unprecedented event here in Christchurch this year, and that's what's really birthed the series and the topics that we're talking about tonight and over the next couple of weeks. So we are wanting to know from a mixture, a diverse group of people who have been thinking about this as well, what can we do here in Christchurch? What are some of the things that we do well already, and maybe what are some of the things that we can do better at? So it's great to have the four of you here, and why don't I begin in prayer? He honore he kororia ki te atua, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai i nā tangata katoa. Anga e te atua e nā kouhou, ki roto ki tēnā o mātou. Whakatongia tō wairoa tapu, te awhina, te tōtohu, ia mātou. Te ako hoki i nā mahi mō tēnei rā. Honour and glory to God, peace on earth, goodwill to all people. Lord, develop a new heart inside all of us, instill in us your sacred spirit. Help us, guide us in all the things we learn this evening. Amen. So I wanted to start with some quick questions for all of you to answer, just some opening questions, some opening reflections. So I think here in Christchurch, all of us have migrated here at some point, whether it was us personally or our ancestors. So I wondered if each of you could share a bit about your personal story coming to Christchurch, what's brought you to this city or brought your family to this city. So why don't you start, Matthew?
Curator tātou, tau tonu te ranga Māori o te ruiki kia koutou, the peace of Christ be with you. Yes, Andrew's right. I'm Matthew Jack. I'm the minister at Knox Church. I've been in Christchurch now for about 5.5 years. I had family in Auckland, and I spent a lot of my time studying in Dunedin. So for me, for many years, Christchurch was a place that had an airport that I was passing through, and I deeply resented having to be in Christchurch because I was generally on my way to somewhere else. I'm in Christchurch because I am a minister within the Presbyterian Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I left ministry for a while. I was out of ministry long enough to begin to miss it and to find myself thinking, well, I said to God, I am not going to be a minister anymore. And after a number of years of doing that, I realised that whether I liked it or not, I was a minister and I was called to do this kind of work. One of the problems, though, is that I am a gay man, and within the Presbyterian community that's a problem because my church doesn't believe that gay people should be in leadership roles. They have to put up with me because I was on the list of ministers in good standing prior to the time that they brought in this new expectation. I'm in Christchurch because Christchurch has 2 of the 4 Presbyterian parishes in this country that are willing to have a gay minister. I never planned to be in Christchurch. Christchurch didn't greatly appeal. Why am I here? It's because there is a Christian community here who said, you're okay, come and be with us. So I know about hospitality. And I am here in this city, which is slowly becoming my city because of hospitality.
Hello, my name is Steph. I moved here to Christchurch about 13 years ago with my family to take up a work role. I think our plan at the time was that we wouldn't be here for long, largely because all our family and friends and everyone we knew was in the North Island, and we didn't really know anybody in the South Island, let alone in Christchurch. And our children were of an age where we would have got them all through primary school, secondary school, and we figured we could then go back to the north. I would moved a lot, and I've moved a lot in my life, and so I suppose the movement wasn't going to be an unexpected thing. But what I hadn't counted on was how deeply fond of Christchurch, of course, my children became in the time that we have been here, and how for them, their formative years have happened here in Christchurch, their growing years. And so they are deeply embedded in this community, and this is where they see themselves, well, 3 of the 4, living out their days. I want to be where they are, and so I am finding Christchurch a place that is my flatmate. I reconnected with a flatmate, Jenny, who she and I had flatted together some 20 years ago, and I asked her, as a person who had moved to Christchurch, how long it took her before it felt like home, because it is such a deeply settled community, and she said it took her 20 years. And so I figured, I'm still a baby, I'm beginning to find my way around, but I think in the post-earthquake period, people are able to make Christchurch their home in a deeper way more quickly.
Okay, good evening. My name is Aklilu. My story starts when I was a kid that I didn't have the privilege to live in my country, and my family took me to Sudan, where I live as a refugee for a while, and then moved to Egypt. We're talking about hospitality, so especially in this country, it's for me was like, as a Christian to live in, as a minority Christian to live in a Muslim nation, I felt that like how I was not accepted in that area, especially in Sudan and Egypt. Then moved to, in 2013, I came to Christchurch. It was not my choice, actually. My family was resettled in 2008 as a refugee to Christchurch, and then part of the program of the family reunification, I came as a migrant to Christchurch. And when you come from a very traditional culture and a culture that is full of values and tradition. And to come to live in Christchurch, for me, was a little bit hard. But the choice I made was because my family, especially when I say my family, my mom, because I have a respect for her. So I accept to live my life in Egypt and to come to join her, because for us, family is a big thing. It's not as anything like we sacrifice for our family, because my mom, she struggled to raise us while we was kids, and it's our turn now to look after her. So I joined to her part of the program which called it Supporting Refugee Family, and I came to Christchurch to support my mom, even though I have my sibling here, but part of the program was for me to come to Christchurch. Yes. I worked in many different sectors. I used to work in the mental health sector, and in February 2019 I moved to Refugee program, which is in the Red Cross. It's a new program for us, and usually I can feel it like, what does it mean to live in a new country, especially because we get many refugee from former refugee from different country, and when they come to Christchurch, we can see how they feel, especially if this former refugee are from a very traditional culture and traditional religion. I am from the Orthodox Church, and which is like a very strict and traditional church, which has a lot of value and respect for traditional cultures. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And welcome, Victoria. I've just introduced you before you came, but we're answering the question of how we came to live in Christchurch.
Okay, good evening, and I do apologize for me just strolling in. It's still part of me settling into Christchurch. I rely on my Google Maps a bit too much, and today was just one of those days I was disappointed. So my apologies there. We moved to Christchurch 4 years ago, and it was not my choice to come here. Prior to coming here, we used to live in Johannesburg, South Africa, originally from Nigeria. So we migrated to Johannesburg around about 2007. And we lived there for a couple of years. We had our first 2 children in Johannesburg, my husband and I. And it just got to a point where South Africa was going through, I don't know if you guys know the history of South Africa. It can be very polarizing due to the history of apartheid and the things that have been happening. So there's this flares of xenophobia that happens from time to time, and politicians, kind of play to it when it's election period. So basically, there are times where Black South Africans would get angry that other Black Africans are depriving them of job opportunities, and expressing their anger would lead to violence and killings. So it happens from time to time, and we kind of just lived with it. But it got to a point where we started to live in fear. And my husband said, this is not how we should live, And he decided, you know what, I'll just find another job somewhere else. And New Zealand was his choice. And I wanted to go to the United States instead. I said, I'll feel better. My husband was like, no way. You can't run away from violence and go to America and thinking that's going to help. So he chose New Zealand, and I followed him, not with the intention to stay, but just to kind of, come with him when he settles in, and then I'll go back with the kids. But there was something about Christchurch when we arrived. It was very peaceful. It was very relaxed. We didn't have to always be in a hurry. And the first Sunday we arrived, I believe it was on I can't remember, I think on a Thursday. And then on Sunday, we were just looking to go to church. We didn't know anywhere, so I went online. And the first church I saw that offered a van ride was the one we chose. So they came and got us. And there was just this warmth that we felt when we came. And I started to think, maybe it's not so bad, And for the first time, I could walk on the street. I could go jogging in the morning, So that was how we came to live in Christchurch. And me just packing a 20 kg suitcase turned into me staying here 4 years.
Excellent. It's amazing. You've all got different stories of coming here, and yet all of them involved not thinking that you'd be here.
We need someone who was on the first 4 ships and they're really to level things out, don't we?
So picking up what you were just talking about, Victoria, about the peacefulness of Christchurch. Perhaps, what have you been reflecting on, all four of you, what have you been reflecting on since March and the events that have happened in our city?
I found myself talking to my supervisor about what happened on the 15th of March. And I told him about what we had done at Knox on the Sunday. On the Friday, I had a sermon and prayers all organised, and then the shootings happened, and I thought, none of that is going to work, we've got to start again. So we did a few things at Knox that were not polished, but they were real in the moment. And my supervisor was asking me about those. And I said, one of the things we did was we gave people an opportunity to write notes to God, write notes to their neighbours down at the mosque. We also realised that there were some people who didn't know what to say, but would want something to do. So we did the very un-Presbyterian thing of giving people the opportunity to light candles. And huge numbers of people came forward and lit candles. When I was putting the candles away at the end and making sure that they didn't burn down the church, we counted them. And I told my supervisor that I found it kind of uncanny. I was thinking, there's a whole lot of candles here. There were 49 of them. And at that stage, 49 people had been killed. I said to my supervisor, because they hadn't found number 50 at that stage, he said, I knew number 50. He was a schoolboy at Burnside High School, where my supervisor works, and my supervisor used his name. You hear a lot about the theory of 6 degrees of separation. It means anyone on this planet can contact anyone else on the planet through 6 personal interactions. They reckon probably in New Zealand it's about 2 degrees of separation. What have I been thinking about? The first thing I've been thinking about is that we cannot live separately. We are connected each to the other, whether we like it or not. And we have to get on with making it work. Withdrawal, denying the existence of the other, not letting difference exist, it just won't work. We're in it together, and we must make it work. Part of making it work, I think, also is dealing with what has happened. One of the things that I've reflected on is our inclination after these sorts of things to say, this is not who we are. We did not do this. It was done by a man who came up from Dunedin, who originated in Australia. This is not us. Christchurch doesn't have a racism problem, does it? Again, we have to share the world. We have to stand up to the fact that we are all responsible for making this world. It's our city, even though 4 out of 4 didn't plan to be here. It is our city. We have to be responsible. And part of that, I think, is breaking the culture of silence when bad things get said. There was quite a lot of talk about that, and that grabbed me. They are the 3 things I've been thinking about since the 15th of March.
Yeah. Actually, it was a very tragic event. For me, the only thing I was struck with was because it happened in New Zealand, because everyone thinks New Zealand is a safe haven, especially if I speak on behalf of the refugee and migrant, because it's a peaceful place to live. So the shock I had is like, it's not because why it happened, because I've been through many things while I was in Egypt, where church was bombed in East and Christmas days, and many of my friends died inside the church, or even going toward the border of Egypt and Israel, seeing many people killed there. So that didn't touch me, but the only thing I was touched with is like, this is in Christchurch in New Zealand, where everyone thought that it's a safe haven and came to Christchurch. But one of the most thing that touched me also was that the response from the entire community. Because whenever this happened in any other nation, no one respond with the way we respond here in Christchurch. It was lovely. It was awesome. Especially when the government condemned as a terrorist attack. Believe or not, no one in any other nation, when a white person attack any place, say it's a terrorism. Usually terrorism is related to Islam, which is not true. I don't mean there is no terrorism in Islam. There is many Muslims who translate their Quran in the wrong way and kill people. But whenever this happens, usually everyone, especially in the Western world, they say, these Muslims are terrorists. I grew up in Sudan. Sudan is one of the, maybe 98% of their population are Muslims. I lived there, and I know as a minority Christian how I feel. I was like discriminated and everything, but because I believe in what I believe, so I never been affected. I lived in Egypt the same. 10% of the Egyptian population is Christians, but still they suffer until today. Whenever any attack happen, no one talk about that. But yeah, when any white attack any church, like last week what happened in Texas, and that's why Donald Trump, when he just respond for that, this is the white supremacism, I was very happy. It's the first time to say that, and that's a terrorist attack. So the response from our Prime Minister was awesome because she condemned that this is a terrorist attack. But the only thing I want to reflect was at that time was, it's not when she said that this is not us, it is us. We are. It happened here in Christchurch, in New Zealand. We need to respond in that way, that we need to have a responsibility for everything what happened. Because when you talk about terrorism, don't look only on the other side, on Muslims only. We have a problem. Pastor who was talking before, like about the gay hatred in our church. Yeah, there is. This is discrimination, and there is also like she was talking about some xenophobia and all stuff. It happened even here in Christchurch. There is. So I think it's our responsibility. But the most important was when I stood beside the mosque and I saw people hugging each other. It never happened in other war in the world. That's why we get a credit for our Prime Minister. Her photo was like on the longest building in the world, Burj Al Khalifa. I was so proud to be a New Zealander and live here in Christchurch. So that's us, like we need to love each other. And the biggest is love, whoever we are, because I'm from the Red Cross, but also I'm Christian. Because Christ taught me the love in the cross. He didn't die only for Christians. If we say that, we are foolish. He died for everyone, and that's the love we need to show to the other world.
I have so much to say about this, but I'll try and keep it short. So when we arrived in Christchurch, part of the first things I did was to ask people how they survived the earthquakes, because we watched it overseas. We're not here when it happened. And my friend, who was our host at the time, just talked about it and how he survived and how he had to duck down and all of those things. But one thing he said that stayed with me was, there was so much love. There was so much, everybody was hugging each other. People were checking on each other. Nobody cared if you were black or white or whatever. That was the first time I really felt like I belonged in a community in Christchurch. And at the time he said it, I thought about it, but I just kind of put it away. And then the shooting happened. And we saw the response. We saw the love. We saw the community. And I just thought to myself, we don't need a disaster to show that human part of who we are on the inside. I have a 2.5-year-old. And when I had him, I've got 3 children in total. And when we moved to Christchurch, another thing I had to learn really quickly was that I would not be able to afford a maid here like I did in South Africa. So I had to take some time off work to stay at home because of the kids. but I got very tired of that real quick, and I wanted to go back to work. So I was looking for affordable childcare for my son. My middle child was 1 when we came, and she went to a Christian preschool because we're Christians, and I just want them to have that exposure to to Christ. But when she moved on to primary school, the fees at the Christian preschool was increased. And when I looked at me working part-time, I would not be able to afford having my 2-year-old at the same preschool. So out of necessity, a friend recommended the Muslim preschool in Christchurch. And I pondered on it for a long time. I said, I don't know, By the way, I grew up in Nigeria, which is about 52% Muslim, 48% Christian. Nigeria has a population of over 250 million people. We have about 300 tribes and 510 languages are spoken in Nigeria. So I grew up with Muslims, is what I'm trying to say. So it's not the fact that it was a Muslim or Islam school that got me. I was just a bit concerned about, going into their community and not having to cover my hair, and I didn't want to feel like I was intruding on their beliefs. But I went there and I said, I'm just going to go have a look and just talk to them and be honest about my intentions. So I got in there and I said, look, I need help with my son. I hear you guys are affordable, but when he turns 3, I'll move him out to the Christian preschool. So basically, I'm only here because it's cheap. So, I just was really honest with my intentions. And she said to me, look, we accept children of all faith. Obviously, because we're the only ones that cater to our community, we have predominantly Muslim children at the school. But that's okay. That's why we're here. We understand the struggle migrants go through. So we're more than happy to have him till he's 3. And we'll give you some more hours for free, if that helps. And I'm like, did you hear what I just said? So out of necessity, I put my son in the school. But what I found was love. What I found that I did not find in the Christian preschool was so much love and understanding, non-judgment. It was just, you're always welcome. And then the shooting happened. The head teacher's son and husband were at the mosque, and he was one of the 50 that died. I knew him, not personally, but his wife helped out at the preschool, and they have a 2-year-old daughter that plays with my son. And when the shooting happened that afternoon, I was rushing to pick my son because as soon as I left work and I heard the mosque had been attacked, I knew it was an attack on Muslims. So I was really frantic and I tried to get there as soon as I could. But and I asked her, how are you doing? How's your son? She said, I haven't heard from my son. I heard my husband is in hospital, but I don't know. But just take your child and, we're just trying to get the kids away. So I got home and I prayed, because I knew her and I knew that she was worried about her son. I kept checking up, is your son okay? Have you heard from your son? And finally on Saturday, the news came that he had passed and he was one of the 50. And the preschool was shut down for about 2 weeks after that. But when it reopened, I felt this enormous sense of guilt going back there and putting my son. I felt like I was going to give them more responsibility in the midst of their grief. But I had to anyway, because life has to go on. And one thing I noticed that I want us to take away tonight was that in the middle of their sorrow and their grief, there was love. They could still smile in the morning and say, good morning, welcome, assalamu alaikum, give the kids a hug. Even in the midst of the grief, you could see the tears in her eyes when I asked her, how are you doing? You could see that. And because they were, but what I also noticed that I couldn't quite understand was, even as I saw the sorrow in her eyes, her love was still genuine. I struggled to kind of, understand how they're able to balance that. It was genuine, and never for once did it diminish, from my point of view, the enormity of the grief that they were going through. So when it comes to hospitality, which is a theme we're talking around tonight, is regardless of, the depravity of the person who walked in here and attacked them in their place of worship, they could still love us as Christians. They could still love me regardless of my intention of, I just want to put my child here till it's, convenient. And I think the worst thing we can do as human beings is have apathy, like, it doesn't concern me, which we all naturally are inclined to. When we watch a news on TV, we can for maybe 5 minutes connect and then we disconnect because it's not, in our house. But this was brought into New Zealand, and with the shootings in the US over the last week, they always reference to say, we were inspired by the attack in Christchurch. So somehow it now concerns us. And this is something we have to actively and openly talk about. How do we bridge that gap between, we're here in New Zealand, terrorism is now an international problem. We're not as safe as we thought we were. So even if as Kiwis we do not think like that, we go online, we use social media, there are other people who think like that and can feed those things into us. So I think the biggest challenge for us is how do we start to educate our young people, which is the common theme I see in these attacks. These people are between 19, 20, 24, 22, committing these heinous crimes. How do we reach out to them? How do we introduce the world to them before they get radicalized online? So yeah, that's what I've been pondering about since the match has been a bit long. Thank you for indulging me. Yeah. So how do we bridge that? How do we reach those people before they become radicalized online?
Yeah, I guess I come at it a little differently, simply because for me the month of March was lived mostly in the North Island. My mother had been diagnosed with cancer at the beginning of March that had spread throughout most of her body by the time it was diagnosed, and she was dying. And so I was on planes every weekend. I was living in a bubble and spent the last few weeks of March essentially at her bedside as her body sort of succumbed to the illness. And for me, it seemed that March and most of April were filled with death and the thoughts of the fact that we are all going to die. And for many people, the massacres here in Christchurch led to some conversations that alarmed me about the disconnect between a Christian, a professing Christian, and their expression of fear or outrage, and just the lack of, I suppose, a considered theology of suffering and death. And so when people are afraid, they can do some terrible things. They can say terrible things and behave in extraordinarily unkind ways. Fear can drive all kinds of destructive behaviour. And so I have found myself in that time period and around even my mother's death. There are lots of people who are not comfortable speaking about dying, even in a death in a later life, that, you know, a person who has lived a full and rich life. That for me has been a source of reflection. I, as a Christian, you know, we are people of you know, we believe that Jesus died and rose again. We are people who have hope, but we also believe in suffering as part of the human experience. And so when we are faced with our own death, what is our response going to be? I was greatly moved by the story of the man who stood at the door and said, "Welcome, brother," and that they were his last words. Words of remarkable open hospitality. And I began to, because I was grieving too, despair that in my Christian faith, which I dearly love Jesus and the gospel of hope and life that he has brought to me, but I am sometimes so disappointed that this gospel doesn't always translate into open-heartedness towards others when we are in a place of when our fears are brought to the surface.
So I want to give a chance to perhaps share some stories of your experiences of hospitality. So I'll ask all four of you actually if you've got a particular story, perhaps a positive or a negative.
I have a favourite story that I have shared. I like to share it a lot because it was so moving for me. It was when we lived in Auckland, and it concerns one of my children who, he's happy, everyone knows that it was him now, but we lived in a very small flat while we were studying at Theological College, and so my husband and our 4 children and I were living upstairs, and downstairs were a couple, Rinky and Vijay, and they had a small baby, and Rinky's mum was out from India to help them look after the small baby. And one day, I noticed that they were a Hindu family, and Rinky's mum prayed regularly outside in the garden in the mornings. And so, but she didn't speak any English, and so we just, hi, as we're going up and down the driveway. One day, one of my kids, after school, turned on the bath and then went and sat down in front of the television and forgot that they had left the bath on. And Rinky came roaring up the stairs and said, "Steph, my house is raining." It was like, oh no, what can that be? Opened the hall door and there was a small wave of water coming out to greet us. So we quickly waited, turned off the bath, at least it would stop pouring down, and then went to pull the plug and started throwing towels around to try and clean up the damage, and then went downstairs to see how bad things were and what we could do to help. And it made me aware, and their circumstances were so different to ours. They didn't have enough towels to clean up the mess that we had made, the Robsons. And my son, who had done this, had become ashen. Like he felt terrible. And I said to him, "You just need to just go there and be there. Stay connected. Come on, I'll come with you and we'll go downstairs." And he went down very bravely. And we all felt sick, I think, anyway. We were trying to help clean up. And he went up to apologise. And the grandma, who didn't speak a word of English, took his face in her hands and ruffled his hair and said, "No," and just held him close. He was tearful. I was tearful. It was one of the most beautiful moments I have ever experienced in my life of grace and hospitality. And they were Hindu. It blew my mind. Because in my Bible college, there were certainly people who were saying, "Oh, the heathen, need converting and it's all." But there was one of the most profound experiences of love to this day I have ever experienced. Beautiful hospitality.
I'm just trying to think. Certainly when we came to Christchurch, we received a lot of hospitality. Recently, my husband was frustrated with work and he said, "Oh my God, if I met this kind of people when we came, we definitely would have gone back." But we received a lot of hospitality from the church community at the time. The people who reached out to us and welcomed us and were genuine with, "Oh, how are you guys coping? What do you need?" And there shall be no needs amongst us, just let us know. It came from a very genuine place. And not just that, when I was struggling with the kids on my own, because I'd always worked and had a live-in nanny at the house in South Africa. So coming here and having to do everything myself was a huge shift. And I struggled a little bit with trying to adjust with the kids and everything. And I got, a very dear friend from church who would come in and, stay with the kids and babysit them for me. She was a preschool teacher. So she said, "Don't worry, I know how to do it. Just tell me how you want it done." So that was a very lovely experience that we had. And but we've also experienced the other side of hospitality that made me question sometimes our intention when we say we're hospitable. And this was within the church community as well. One of the ladies who reached out to me when we came, asked me a few questions. And I don't know what she was expecting my answer to be about, where you come from, why you came here. But I was honest. I tried to be as honest as I can. And I said, I didn't want to come here. I was doing okay in my career, but yeah, it was just for the crime and everything. And I kind of noticed at the time we didn't have a car because we just came, and they gifted us with a car at the time because it was winter. We came right in the middle of winter, and we were so grateful for it, so grateful. And we, after a while, when we settled down, gave the car away to our friend who helps us look after the kids because she said her son needed a car, and we thought the gracious thing to do would be to gift it away since they said we could keep it. So we did, and we bought another one. But I noticed that from the time that particular lady saw us with a different car, her attitude changed. When she also found out that I was working in a certain industry, she walked up to me and said, "Oh, I hear you work in the same office with Phil," which is another church member. I said, "Yes," and her attitude changed. So for me, it looked as though if I was not always at the receiving end of her hospitality, then there was a disconnect. Like I always had to be a recipient of the grace because I was from Africa and they had to teach me everything. And I even got asked one time, "Do you know what a duvet is?" I'm like, "Okay," you know. So in that way, when you give hospitality in that context, it gets rejected because it didn't make me feel any good, and I decided never again do I want to be a recipient of their kind of hospitality. So we need to be careful as Christians when we go out and reach out to people, not to give it in a tokenistic way that kind of makes them feel like, "Oh, oh, you poor African thing, will help you, we'll teach you." We should be open to also learning from them, listening to the stories that we also bring, because not every African is poor. Not every African has left Africa because of economic reasons. Not every African is illiterate. So we need to understand these things. And I'll never forget one experience that happened recently. This black lady, because I think we're the only black people left in my church now, every other person left. This black lady was visiting from Australia, and she came to church one Sunday. So we stood and we're talking to her, just based on the affinity of we both black. But she was, I believe, Kenyan, right? So speaks a different language than I do. I mean, in my country, there's 500 languages. I don't understand all of them, not to talk of the continent of Africa. So we're just talking, and this elder works up to us and he says, "Oh, hi, welcome." And he starts, talking to her, "Where you from? Do you also need prayers for your papers with immigration?" And she says, "No, I'm Australian." And he was shocked, because he just, in all fairness to him, he's used to a lot of immigrants coming there to pray for immigration to give us papers. So he just thought this was one of those times as well. But this lady was Australian. She was not looking for papers. Her husband is Kiwi, who had moved from Australia to take up a job here. And she just came to worship like we came too. So yeah, we just need to be careful, how we translate that goodness and grace onto other people, because if we do it wrong, we tend to repel them away. Yeah.
Yeah. Hospitality is usually about acceptance. You need to accept the other side. If you don't accept him, you will never give him hospitality. And as I told you earlier, I went through many stuff where in place I was accepted, and in another place I was not accepted because of my skin color, my religion, and in other place I was accepted because of that also. So I have two examples here also. Like when I first came to Christchurch, I came from Egypt, and I lived in Cairo for 11 years. I used to work as the deputy director of a psychosocial training institute, helping refugee and migrant. So the deputy director of United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees was a Kiwi lady from Christchurch. So when she heard that I'm going to Christchurch, she said that's good. My auntie lives there, and I will tell her about you, because we were close friends and all that. So she told her that I have a friend who's coming to Christchurch, please, can you visit him? So the message, her auntie, she got the message and she saw that I don't have anything to eat, anything. So she just called me, said that, hey, my sister, my sister, she called me and said that you are in Christchurch, can I meet you? The beautiful thing I felt is like, okay, I said I can meet you, and she gave me an appointment, push in. I was brand new, like 2-3 days in Christchurch. I asked someone from the community to take me to the push in. I met her there, and she came with this lovely cookies, because she told her like you don't have anyone there, so she thought like I don't have place to live, to sleep, and probably might be hungry and all stuff. She came with these cookies. And then we start talking, and I told her my mom, she lives here and all stuff, and she was so happy. And she asked me, can I come and visit your mom? I say, it's okay, you can visit. So this is the good hospitality. And the same time, when I used to work for the mental health service, I used to do the night shift, and the night shift in Christchurch is back over. So probably I can understand because of mental illness, whatever, but yeah, one of the guys there, he said that, hey, why do you come here? Go home. Go your home country. And I looked at him. I said that, where are you from? Probably you're also a migrant like me. You came from other place. Also, you need to go your place because this country is like built in migration, okay? So it's all about the grassroots, how we teach our people, how we teach our youngsters to accept the others. If you accept someone who without discrimination, without his color, whatever, then hospitality will come. And this is what we show like on the mosque attack. The mainstream accepted who is his neighbor. So yeah, it's about acceptance.
Neither of my stories are based in Christchurch, I'm afraid. I can still tell them.
Fine, yeah.
Some years ago, I was on a study exchange in Germany, and I had rudimentary German language, and life was okay. Easter came along, and I was told that everybody in the university city where I was living would go away for Easter, so think about where you might want to go. I decided naively that this Easter I would like a contemplative monastic experience, and what better place to get a contemplative monastic experience than in Thésée in France, because I'd sung their music and loved their liturgy, and I thought I knew exactly where to go. My French is terrible. On my way to Thésée, I got lost. It took me about 2 days longer to get there than I thought it would. I arrived late and really, really tired. I went into the chapel and I fell asleep. It's lovely to feel safe enough to fall asleep within a religious community, and that was good until one of the chapel assistants poked me on the shoulder and told me that my posture was irreverent and I needed to leave. So I've been booted out of a chapel in Thésée for irreverent posture. That was done in the name of Christ by monastic people. In contrast to that, I mentioned that I gave up on ministry. I did end up in China teaching English, and I went to China via Hong Kong, and it's interesting to watch Hong Kong at the moment, isn't it? The place I was living in China was a 3-hour ferry ride from Hong Kong. I was assured by Vodafone, my good friend Vodafone, that the phone SIM card that I had and the handset that operated in Hong Kong would also work in Zhongshan on the Chinese mainland. Halfway through the ferry ride, the phone stopped working. I was inclined to think that wasn't a huge problem because the school that I was working for had said they would pick me up in the school van from the ferry terminal. I arrived and there was no van, and I had no phone, and I didn't speak Mandarin. And I found myself thinking, I am in this place, I have no resources, I don't know what to do, I've just got to wait. See what happens. and rely on the people who said they would welcome me to do that. You know, I'm a white male Kiwi. I can't say a whole lot about vulnerability, but I could tell you that when you know you're out of your depth and you have no option but to rely on the kindness of other people and their commitment to you, it feels quite scary. And I think it's a good experience for privileged people to have that kind of experience. It's no fun, but it does change the way you look at things. The people who did pick me up about 2 hours later, their van had broken down. They looked after me really well for the 6 months I was in China. They were atheists. And part of my induction into the school teaching mode was, don't talk about God. We don't do God here. But they did hospitality. And the monks of Taizé booted me out of their chapel.
I'll stay with you, Matthew. I wanted to ask you a question about perhaps what are some of the blind spots that the church has when it comes to hospitality?
I think one of the most interesting New Testament figures with respect to hospitality is Martha of Mary and Martha. You know, she's the consummate hostess. She wants everything to be perfect, but she fails to engage with the person she is trying to welcome. You know, it's all about hospitality. She's probably got a really good program. She's clearly upset when it's hard work. And her sister is the one who receives Jesus into the house. So there's something non-theoretical, really, really practical in hospitality about honouring the person. And I can tell you that in terms of blind spots in the church, my church tells me it loves me, but it doesn't want me to minister there. I'm not talking about Knox. Knox receives me. This is the institution. But yeah, we're using the language of hospitality, but we're not coping with the person right in front of us.
I would ask you, Aki, as well, thinking about perhaps Kiwi culture, and what are some of the ways in which we do hospitality well, and maybe what are some of the ways that we do hospitality not so well?
I think sometimes ignorance is a problem. And when ignorance because you don't know is the biggest problem. So usually here, we don't know about people, and there is a prejudgmental about stuff without knowing, as you say that. And I can give you a simple example. Have you ever heard of Michael Higgins, the first amputated person who climbed Mount Everest? He's a Kiwi. The first time I saw him in Auckland, his 2 legs was amputated. And I saw him, he was like cleaning. I say, who is this man? I saw him, and later on when I went to the conference room, he was sharing about his story. With 2 legs amputated, he climbed Mount Everest. How incredible, I say. So usually we do prejudgment with anything. As you said, some Kiwis, they think Africa is a country. And usually that's why I tell them, like, Africa is not a country, guys. We should learn. We need to be open to know. I used to study at ARA. A friend of mine, she said that, where are you from? Are you from Africa? I say, yes, I'm from Africa. She said, my boyfriend is from Africa. Oh, I say, where from Africa? From Africa. She don't want to know, but she pretending she knows that Africa. This is the problem. We need to be open to learn. If you don't know something, say, I don't know, what is that? Especially with many people who migrate, as a refugee to this country, we should start knowing their problem. Recently, we had a very lovely story about the Waitakere school. Few girls, they was reading a book, and they read about an Afghan refugee. And then when it was a World Refugee Day, we was organizing that. So one of the school teachers sent them an email. She said that, hey, I have they are 10, 11, and 12 years old, 4 girls. They start searching about why refugees they are coming to New Zealand. We don't know why they are coming. everyone he sings like, these people, okay, they don't have money, home, they are hungry, and everyone relate Africa is like of hunger and disaster and everything. It's not about that. So these girls, they donate, like they start collecting canned food, and then they call, can we come and donate them to this former refugee, which is good. Like, so we're starting at school, so we need to introduce a culture of learning of others in our school. So that's the best thing we need to develop. But just accepting everything as it is and not be open to that is not good. So we lack this stuff. Even like now, when we go out, even in the airport, we welcome this former refugee. People, they look and they never ask because they don't want to know. So we need to have openness of learning and knowing the others. And that will we are 185. We have 185 cultures here in New Zealand. We never celebrate them. That's only recorded in a book. We say we are rich in cultures and those, but we never celebrate these cultures. We need to be open and celebrate these cultures. In our church, for example, many of the Kiwi churches, like they have many people from different cultures. We should know, and we should ask others why they are here and what is the reason to love.
Steve, thinking about kind of the Christian faith that we have. And I think of Māori culture, and they have this concept of manaakitanga, which is this indiscriminate, kind of expansive hospitality. And I wonder, is there something perhaps I touch on within the Christian faith or within the Christian scriptures that may be similar to that kind of understanding of what hospitality means?
One of the things that I think is very easy for all of us to do is to forget what it is like to be a new person or to be the stranger. It doesn't take long to find yourself settled in somewhere and to stop being aware of newcomers or others and to think that your way is the right way. And so a new person will be given sort of instruction on this is how we do things around here, rather than a genuine openness to the other that allows yourself to be changed by the encounter. Now, there's a biblical example of this, which just goes to prove how bloomin' hard it is, and that is, of course, Peter going to the house of Cornelius. There is Peter, raised as a Jewish man, and he has a vision on the roof where the Lord appears to him and says, Peter, take and eat. And in front of him are all the forbidden foods that he's ever grown up with. And he's saying, no, not me. I'm not going to be making myself impure in this regard. And then, that which I have declared clean, enjoy, basically. And then he summons to the house of Cornelius a Gentile and discovers that the Holy Spirit has been at work there outside the boundaries he had come to imagine was the only place where God would possibly be doing God's thing. That is then, of course, down the track he gets rebuked by Paul, doesn't he, for not eating with the Gentiles. But that is to me, that is a powerful story, because when you finally get your head around the remarkable ways that God moves and works, to me it is a constant reminder that God is always far beyond whatever I expect or imagine. Ephesians, God blows your mind around some of this stuff. So the presumption that we are the ones who sort of have to kind of guard, like this is how we do it around here, as if God needs protecting and has put fallible human beings in the way. There's so much, I think, more that God would help us know about God's self if we were able to perhaps be a little bit less defensive and to gain some self-awareness and to take a step outside our culture of origin, to find somehow a way that we can relinquish some of these things that we've grown up with and to become aware of our assumptions. And of course, the best way to do that is to be a new person yourself. in an utterly unfamiliar environment, or to have somebody, offering a little bit of critique about how they see your own culture. These things are often very hard to hear, and I don't doubt they are painful. This isn't always easy stuff, but it is, it's gospel stuff, isn't it? Because I often imagine that the more, church is hard at the best of times, and the more diverse our communities, the more testament they are to the gospel of grace. Boy, it's hard because we're constantly offending one another, often without knowing it. And so how do we build those relationships in a healthy way, not getting too carried away in every slight or offence, that's some that we can let go, and recognising what is important to address and what isn't, but gaining self-awareness and finding ways to be receptive to others, because another challenge is just the utter disinterest that some people have in people who are different to themselves. How does that curiosity grow? What kindles that curiosity about someone else and how their life might have been very different to your own? How they formed convictions and points of view that may be very different to your own? Where does that hint of that spark of even interest come from? And I would suggest that in my life that is more likely to happen when I have other spiritual practices in place, like not being overcommitted, like not being busy, like taking a Sabbath, like, those sorts of basic Christian disciplines that enable us to have room in our lives, to have spaciousness that has the ability to make room for others, to shove over a bit, to make space.
Yeah, I really like that idea of making space and making room for others, and starting with our own lives and making space and room in our lives for God and for the other. So I want to ask you, Victoria, a question about we've got a number of churches, many from this church, but from other churches represented in the room here. So what can we as churches do better to both be generous hosts and also be respectful guests? What would you say are some of the things that we can do better?
So I'll just go back to adding on to what she just said, is making room and not being so dogmatic in our Christianity. Sometimes we can get so caught up in being Christian that we forget to be a human being. And I believe, because I've pondered this all my life, why did God make us so different? Why is my skin the way it is and the other one the way they are, and then Indians the way they look? And like what's going on here? And I believe that's God's wisdom. And I believe God did it that way to prove to us that He's God and that we cannot put Him in a box of our own expectations on how things should be. And as churches in Christchurch or New Zealand as a whole, whether we like it or not, diversity is here. My daughter's best friend is Japanese, and she goes to a Christian school. And I assumed her parents were Christians because she was there. But when I met the family, they're not practicing Christians. They're not Christians. And I asked the dad, I said, then why did you put your child in a Christian school and you're not a Christian? He said, the few Christians I've met, I like the way they behave. And I wouldn't mind my child behaving like that. So some of us will be the only Bible that people get to ever read in their life. And the more open and accommodating we are, because it's all about the love of Jesus at the end of the day. And if we look at the Bible, we see that Jesus broke all the rules in order to reach the people who needed to be touched. So diversity is hard, I have my own beliefs that I'm bringing with me. There is the way things are done in New Zealand. I'm not trying to come here and then change it. The same way you're not trying to, learn anything now, just get in line. But it's beautiful if we can make room. I think that's the takeaway. Let's just make room to see the other person as an image of God, because I just wonder what God will look like. But anyway, just to see the image and the reflection of God in that person, if we genuinely believe in Christ and believe in God, then we should also be able to expand our consciousness to believe that God can also look like him or like me or Chinese or, so that's just what I would say. And being a guest as well, same thing. I think the same principle applies as seeing you as a guest when you come into my home. Do you see me? Do you see my culture? When I come to church, do I see you? Do I see your culture as well? So it's just, I think making room sums it up, basically. Yeah.
In a moment, I'm going to give you 30 seconds each to explain what you want us to go away thinking about, or what do you want us to take away? And then I'm going to give you all a chance or reflections from what you've heard. Perhaps there's one or a couple the panelists we've got here that you want to direct your question to or your comment to, but hopefully you've been thinking. You have a chance now. Matthew, we'll start with you. What do you want us to go away with?
I've been thinking about sheep and goats. Where were you, Lord? In the most human and somewhat surprising places. My profound exegesis and mini sermon goes like this: people are not your enemy. They are Christ. Christ will meet you in them. Talk to them. Together, reconciled, do the gospel, meet God, listen, speak, be open to others, embrace one another.
When I was thinking about the theme of hospitality, the thing that came to my mind was something that was shared by Sarah Miles when she was out here. I don't know if you were, any of you knew of her visit, but Sarah Miles is a remarkable woman, and she worships in a community, Gregory of Nazianzus in San Francisco, and as part of their liturgy, which is rather spectacular if you watch it online, they include a reference to the fact that they need the stranger, the person who is the stranger in their midst. It's not just, oh, we're going to be nice and hospitable and open our doors to you. They recognize that Christ often appears as the stranger. Where do you locate Christ in your worship? They would locate Christ as being in the person of the stranger in their midst. And so there's that nudge to engage with the stranger in a hospitable way, because you are most likely to encounter Christ.
I think it's interesting also, like, usually we wait people to come to us, but what I want to say that don't wait, that go to people. Because if you're a minority, especially if you're a refugee, migrant, no one will come knock your door. You need to knock the door, because if you welcome them, they will feel that part of you. And then that's the way the church grew. Even during the apostles' time, the apostles didn't stay in Jerusalem. They went all over the world. And that's the mission of Christ. So we need to go and knock their door. When we knock their door, they will welcome us and they will be part of us.
My takeaway is, as this is not just as a church, but as individuals, as parents, I always say to my friends, I met white people before I met white people. I met them in my books. I met them in my school, on TV. Jesus Christ looks white. So we've always had the concept of white, even in Africa. But I asked my colleague an interesting question. Prior to meeting me, have you ever read a book about Africa? Have you ever read a book by an African author? What is your perception of other people? And she said no, she had never. So as parents, as individuals, I want to challenge us to read our kids a bedtime story that is written by an African author. Bring those books into your home, into our schools. Go out of your way. YouTube is there. There's a lot of content that we can find that shows us the culture. When we expose our children to it at an early age, it will be very difficult for them to get radicalized when they grow older, because there's no concept of them, because I know them, right? So me moving to South Africa and engaging with white people for the very first time did not feel foreign to me. Now I had to deal with the behavior, but the concept of seeing them as a person was not new. So I think that's my takeaway tonight to, meet us before we meet you, so to speak. Yeah.
Phone out. If you've got a question or a comment, just raise your hand and Alicia will bring the microphone around.
Victoria, I'm interested to know what your merge, I see Curator merge, what's that all about?
Okay, so I was in the library one day and I saw a lot of beautiful faces around me, and I'd been thinking, because I've been at home looking after my son, what can I do? And it was just like a light bulb moment. I call it a God speaking to me time, where I said, create something that brings people together, where we talk about the difficult conversations but in a loving environment. Because I notice part of the Kiwi culture is we tend to shy away from the difficult conversations. We just like to, it's cultural day, we all dress up and we're happy, and then we go away. But how about we have those conversations about perceptions, about, when you look at me, who do you think I am? About, social issues that face both the host community and the migrants, kind of creating a space that brings us together where we can have those conversations, enjoy the food, listen to good music, all curated in love, because the underlying thing there is love. And when we have love as the underlying thing, we can talk about these conversations openly and honestly, and then go away from there actually having learned something. So that's the whole idea behind Merge.
And you guys are on Facebook as well, so if
Yes, we're on Facebook. We're just starting out. The idea is very robust, but implementation is slow. That's because we don't know what we're doing. I'm just going to be honest. The first one, we kind of pulled it off, but not the way I really wanted it to go. But it's a challenge. It's not an easy feat to actually get people in the room and have these conversations, because I notice Kiwis will not tell you what they're thinking. Yeah, so that's my biggest challenge, to actually get people to talk and say, this is my perception of you as a migrant. And then I challenge you and say, no, that's not who I am. And we kind of have that conversation and still wrap it all in love at the end of the day. Going away, knowing how we really feel about each other and finding a common ground, how we can all, live together and contribute to our community.
I've got another one.
great.
I recently heard one of the Northland Māori leaders saying, we don't want any more refugees in New Zealand. We need to look after our own first. And I wonder if you've got any response, any of the members of the panel, what your Christian response to this might be.
When such question arises, I usually tell them, even Jesus Christ himself was a refugee. He went all the way from Israel to Egypt, where he stayed for 3.5 years, and hospitality and all stuff. So even our church, they need to teach people about why refugees they are coming from their home country. I remember when the Syrian crisis started, many Syrians, they went to Europe, but the way the people they was responding was totally terrible. Oh, look, they have iPhone. Look, they have... That's not refugee. It doesn't mean because they are refugee they don't have anything. So I think from our church they need to start also. So our church they need to teach also who are refugee and why they are coming to this country. Now we are lucky that we doubled the quota, like the government increased the quota to 1,500, which is good. We have a lot of potential to do more and more.
I would just make the additional observation that in the Whanganui situation, they were speaking about a housing shortage was behind a lot of the concern. And I recall the very limited amount of awareness I have and the very limited experience I have in working with refugee families when they were settled. But when I lived in Wellington, I was involved at the margins of something like that. And it's not necessarily either or. I think both are possible at the same time, because the houses that are allocated don't necessarily come from the same source. And these days I think we are learning that many people who may have had housing available for one purpose, are translating it into another purpose. And so it's not entirely straightforward that if you fix one problem, it will be completely resolved and then you can move on to the next one. I mean, the world just doesn't seem to work like that, does it? There are multiple problems and we're attacking them on multiple fronts. And so it seems we don't take that many refugees into New Zealand in the first place. I mean, I think, is this the first group that will be coming to Christchurch in the post-earthquake period? So that's a lot of houses in Christchurch.
So far we are lucky than any other region. The social housing is available here in Christchurch, but in other regions there are people who stay in Mangere for up to 90 days because they can't find accommodation. Most of them, they're going now to a private accommodation and then they get subsidized by MSD. We in Christchurch, we are lucky to have MS, like social housing from Housing New Zealand and Ototai too. But yeah, so we have a lot of potential, and you need to know, like, we are one of the best refugee resettlement program in the world. New Zealand has a unique system of resettlement, the Mangere. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And that we need to be proud of that, because our people, when they come to Mangere, the former refugee, they learn a lot of stuff about New Zealand. Other nation, if you go, you will hear like former refugee committed suicide in 4 or 5 days because the system is not good.
I just want to add to that. So my experience in New Zealand, the racism I've personally received here was from a Maori person, not Pakeha. And I understood it because I'd lived in South Africa. When you deprive a certain group of people of certain things for so long, and finally they get a chance to want to come up, and they see other minority groups coming in as well, there's a sense of you're robbing them of something, and they tend to turn that anger and hatred towards the other minority group that's coming in. I understood it in South Africa because that's exactly what's going on. So I understand it. I do not support statements like that because it can incite, violence and things like that. I think it's just meeting them where they are and having these conversations and hearing them, what do they need? And meeting their needs. Because you meet the Maori needs does not mean you cannot meet the refugees' needs as well. I believe there's enough to go around for everybody.
In the Europe crisis, like the media was talking about, refugees are coming to take up what we have. But refugees, they never come to take, but they come to add to the culture. So whenever a refugee go to a country, he's not there only to take, but he can add their culture. That's why we are proud here. We have 185 cultures. We need to celebrate them, because if not all these migrants and refugees, will not have 185. So that was also the media. So the media also need to change totally. Just need to be like more positive instead of being negative. Yeah.
So when I decided to stay in Christchurch, my whole mind was, I can get a better job here. I can, do this. I can grow here. My family will be safe. It was all about what I was getting from New Zealand, right? But recently, God has been dealing with me about certain things, wanting me to go out there and teach and do all of this. And I thought, who am I to do that here? And what I got was the story of Elijah when God told him to go to the widow, and he had instructed the widow to feed him. And to his amazement, he got there and met a broke and suicidal widow. How can God possibly send me here to get fed? But most times it's not about us. It's about, the other party. So it's just taking away from this, just recognizing that even us as the migrant community and refugees are not here to take. If you let us, there's things we also have to give to the community that will make us a better and stronger, country that we'll all be proud of. So, yeah.
It's wonderful. We might have time for one more.
Thank you very much, panel, for all the thoughts and challenges that you've given us tonight. And I think one of the main things is that too often as churches and Christians, we probably concentrate on the giving of hospitality, which automatically assumes power differential, that we have something and you need it. And just a couple of reflections. In my work as an educator, I've worked with many people from many different cultures, but the earthquakes, I think, taught us quite a lot. We were removed from our house and had to line up with other people for rentals for the first time in many years. And one of those rentals that we ended up in was next door to a Muslim family who were very quick in inviting us to join with them in their house. And it was good to be the stranger, actually. And so each year that we were in that rental, they invited us to celebrate Ramadan with them. And that was a real experience. And where we're living now, we have a Fijian family. And one thing we've shared ideas about gardening in that particular area. And one day they come over with food for us, which is very difficult to accept. And we've learnt to do that graciously. And the very first lot of fruit and vegetables that they grew in their rental place, they brought to us and said, this is our tradition. We always give the first fruits away. And just one other thing that they said to us, apart from calling us grandma and granddad, their children, was thank you for talking to us. And that just spoke volumes to us. And but all of what you've been saying is just in a Christ-like way, meeting each other as human beings regardless of wherever we come from, whatever our background. Thank you very much.
I just want to add, so probably Saturday or Sunday will be also the Muslim Eid. If you have a Muslim neighbor, a Muslim who you know, go say Happy Eid, because it's a big thing to him, like to say, and someone from outside he come and tell him like Happy Eid or Happy Feast. So Saturday or Sunday will be the Eid, so yeah, you will visit him and they will be so happy, because during the mosque attack there was a lot of stuff happen, and even in the neighborhood of the mosque there is a lot of things going well now, like the neighbors are visiting the mosque and all stuff, and they are very open to the mainstream.
Well, I really want to thank all four of you for joining us tonight, and I particularly want to thank you for stories you've shared. Some of them have been quite vulnerable, and I just want to acknowledge the way in which you've come and you've shared from yourself. You've challenged us. You've left us really going away thinking, but it's been a real gift to have you. So why don't we show our appreciation?
Thank you for having us.